Thank you very much, Shira, and my friend, Professor Ronan Kaufman. It's great to be with all of you in a place where I've been teaching now for, I guess, about almost 28 years at this fine law school. And my father taught for about 60 years, finally hanging up his cleats at the age of 92. He's 93 now. And of course, my dad grew up just a few blocks from here. So I have a special affinity for this law school and this university. And I know that at this time of rampant Jew hatred, Christian universities, including Catholic ones like this and Protestant ones, are especially hospitable and supportive of Jewish students, in contrast to many non-Christian universities. It's an interesting phenomenon upon which to reflect. It's beyond the scope of today's remarks, but something to think about and to be grateful for. Since I'm speaking to a law school gathering, it's appropriate that I tell you that one of my judicial heroes has always been Justice Louis D. Brandeis. Shira is a Brandeis Fellow, and perhaps Brandeis is also one of your heroes. Time does not permit me to discuss Brandeis's life or his work, his towering opinions in Whitney versus California, or in Olmsted versus United States. If you want inspiration, you need a quick shot of inspiration, read his concurrence in Whitney and his dissent in Olmsted. And that's just to name two of them. I do want to remind everyone here, though, that Brandeis was not only a judicial hero, he was also a Zionist hero. He was not at all religiously observant. There's not a Jew in this room who could possibly be less ritually observant than Brandeis. But he was inspired by the example of his beloved uncle, Louis Naphtali Debitz, a practicing Jew and ardent Zionist whose last name Brandeis adopted as his middle name. His original middle name was David. In 1915, a year before President Woodrow Wilson nominated Brandeis to the Supreme Court of the United States, Brandeis delivered an important speech in Boston. And at that speech, Brandeis announced that, and I quote, "To be better Americans, we must become better Jews. And to be better Jews, we must become Zionists," unquote. Brandeis served as the leader of the Zionist Organization of America from 1914 to 1921. These were critical years, as you know, that witnessed world-changing events, including World War I and the Balfour Declaration. And the Balfour Declaration was a document in whose promulgation Brandeis played an important role. And by the way, shortly thereafter, it was at Brandeis's request and Brandeis's direction, really, that Professor and later Justice Felix Frankfurter went to the peace conference and worked on behalf of advancing the interests of Zionism in the post-war deliberations after the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. An important historical note. And when you travel to Israel, you can visit Kibbutz Ein HaShofet. It's in the Emek, and Ein HaShofet means spring of the judge. He's the judge. He's the judge. You can also visit Kfar Brandeis, which is now a neighborhood of Hadera, but at the time, Brandeis provided the funds for the purchase of that land a century ago, and it was a village, and it was called Kfar Brandeis, again, now a neighborhood of Hadera. Meanwhile, back here in the USA, we are privileged to live in one of the oldest states, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. If you go across our state, on the roof of Philadelphia's ornate city hall stands a statue of William Penn, Pennsylvania's eponymous founder. Penn had been persecuted in England for his Quaker religious beliefs, and he brought a spirit of tolerance to the colony that he founded. But this was the 17th century, after all, so even Penn's imagination had its limits. Article 34 of his 1682 Frame of Government of Pennsylvania, which perhaps ironically I accessed online through the Saul and Lillian Goldman Law Library of Yale Law School, provided as follows: that all treasurers, judges, etc., justices of the peace, and other officers, etc., relating to courts or trials of causes or any other service in the government, and all members elected to serve in provincial council and general assembly, and all that have right to elect such members, shall be such as possess faith in Jesus Christ, etc., etc. Pennsylvania's first constitution, enacted in September 1776 and signed by Benjamin Franklin as convention president, required legislators to declare that they, quote, acknowledge the scriptures of the Old and New Testament to be given by divine inspiration, unquote. Nonetheless, these restrictions were removed by our 1790 Constitution, and Jews have enjoyed freedom and opportunity in Pennsylvania both before and since then. Today, we in Pennsylvania rightly cherish and celebrate the great legacies of Penn, Franklin, and our other founders. Indeed, freedom and opportunity have been enjoyed by Jews throughout the United States of America in ways and measures unmatched in the history of our diaspora. There have been bad episodes, to be sure. For example, there was General Ulysses Grant's 1862 order, promptly countermanded by President Abraham Lincoln, expelling the Jews from Grant's wartime area of command. There was the lynching of Leo Frank in Marietta, Georgia in 1915. Take a look at the proud faces of those Georgian men. There was the deadly Crown Heights race riot of 1991. And there have been other evil deeds throughout the years, some of them murderous, all of them troubling. But still in all, the decades since World War II have been rightly called the greatest golden age of the exile. Now we are being reminded of the fact that an exile, however charmed, remains an exile, and that every golden age, having begun, must someday come to an end. We saw this in Spain. We saw this in Germany. Perhaps we are starting to see it here, now. Maybe we started to see it in 2017, when hordes of torch-bearing racists and Jew haters marched in Charlottesville, Virginia, chanting, "Jews will not replace us." By the way, their math was pretty bad because we're 2% of the U.S. population. Or maybe we started to see it in 2018, right here, when Robert Bowers murdered 11 Jews on a Shabbat morning in the Tree of Life Synagogue, where my wife and I were married and on whose board of trustees I had previously served and in whose sanctuary many of you had worshipped at some point in time. Maybe we started to see it in the 2019 murders of Jews in Poway and in Jersey City and in Muncie. Maybe we started to see it when Jews have been repeatedly assaulted in Brooklyn and many other cities and towns in recent years. Maybe we started to see it in 2022 when a British Pakistani held a rabbi and 3 others hostage at gunpoint in a Colleyville, Texas synagogue on Shabbat. But even for those whose attention had drifted away after these and other horrors, the onslaught of Jew hatred since October 7, 2023 has been a wake-up call. No sooner had terrorists from Gaza invaded Israel, murdering, raping, burning, mutilating, and kidnapping men and women and children, then Jew haters rushed to condemn the victims. Media outlets, college professors, and mobs of extremists all joined in the uproar. But this uproar was not against the terrorist perpetrators. No, it was not a protest against the barbarians who had perpetrated the atrocities. Instead, the uproar almost immediately arose against the victims, against the Jews, and against the Jewish state. A state, and I emphasize this, a state whose armed forces had not yet even begun to enter Gaza to fight Hamas and to attempt to rescue the hostages. And it was against Jews worldwide. Against Jews worldwide. Professors at elite universities, like this scoundrel at Cornell, supposedly a great Ivy League elite institution, cheered the attacks, declaring, as this guy said, that he felt, quote, exhilarated, unquote, by Hamas's terror attacks. Mobs of protesters hit the streets. They were not protesting against the Gazan terrorists, but they were protesting in favor of them, chanting "from the river to the sea" and other hateful slogans that call for the genocide begun against Jews on October 7 to be continued, perhaps by other terrorists in the region. They called for an intifada revolution. That sounds a lot like a solution that resembles the final solution. And this hatred, it rages. This fire burns more fiercely than ever. Blame the Jews, not those who murder or rape or torture the Jews. Blame the Jews. In Philadelphia, across the state, violent mobs picketed a restaurant that commits, what's the grave sin? They serve Israeli food. This mob is protesting a restaurant because they have the temerity to serve Israeli food. Jewish community events, even Holocaust commemoration events, are all fair game for the haters. A wall has been breached, a dam has burst. The Jew haters are on the march. Much more can be said and will be said and must be said on this ugly and troubling phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that's not new. At Purim, we read Megillat Esther, and we remembered the slaughter that Hamas's predecessors, Haman and the Amalekites, the Agagites, attempted against the Jews in Persia long ago. The rulers of current Persia just launched an unprecedented attack against the Jewish state. So Purim is the past, but it is also the here and the now. To be sure, this is no prophecy of doom, and it is no certainty. And I will return to this point in due course. For now, I offer as a text a thought expressed recently by Michael Orin, a native son of the state of New York, whose remarkable life has included service in the Tzanchanim, the IDF Paratroopers Brigade, many faculty appointments, many best-selling books, election to the Knesset, an assignment to Washington as Israel's ambassador. Dr. Orin has observed that after October 7, diaspora Jews, and particularly Jews here in his native USA, have three choices: stay and hide, stay and fight, or move to Israel. Now, some of you may find those words melodramatic. Many of you will feel challenged by them. Orin's words certainly challenge complacency. Some may even claim to be offended by them. But I will engage with them. Most Galut Jews will hide. History tells us this. It seems easier. It is easier for a time to just plug along, trying to make the best of things. The storms will pass. People will come to their senses. It's really not that bad. Most Jews in Weimar Germany felt this way. So did many in Eastern Europe. When Zev Jabotinsky spoke to the Jews of Warsaw at the Grand Synagogue on Tisha B'Av in 1938, he urged them to get out before it was too late. Some did try, and most of those found no refuge. As you know, our United States disgracefully had locked its gates, disgracefully. And the United Kingdom had not only locked its gates, but it also prohibited Jews from entering Eretz Yisrael, which was then controlled by the UK under its Palestine mandate. Most of the Jews that Jabotinsky addressed on that Tisha B'Av stayed behind in Poland, and most of them were murdered by the Germans and their eager anti-Jewish local helpers. So Orin's alternative number one, staying and hiding, is the easy impulse of many, but it is no solution. It never has been, and it never will be. Now, hiding is one thing, and it is understandable, even though it's not admirable. Worse than those who hide are those who work to undermine the Jewish people from within. This is a neurosis. This is a neurosis that afflicts our Jewish people deeply. And it goes all the way back to Bereshit, to Genesis. Cain killed Abel. The Hellenizers fought the Maccabees even before the Maccabees could fight the Seleucids. The defenders of Jerusalem, they fought each other while General Titus waited outside the walls for the Jews to bleed each other and weaken themselves before he finally sent his legions in to bring down the walls, storm and destroy the temple, and exile the Jewish people. The conversos, los conversos, former Jews themselves, were among the most avid persecutors of Jews during the Spanish Inquisition. Jewish labor leader Samuel Gompers, himself an immigrant, supported the 1924 law that severely limited Jewish immigration to the U.S. And these limits would close the door to millions of European Jews when Hitler marched east 15 years later. Many, not all, but many leaders of American Reformed Jewry were anti-Zionist and oppose the creation of the state of Israel. Some are even returning to this attitude today. And on and on. Examples of this fratricide, this cringeworthy neurosis, abound in Jewish history. Today, we see this perverse tendency in what I call the, quote, as a Jew, unquote, Jews. The as a Jew Jews. You know these folks. Tremendous self-centeredness and self-indulgence, by the way. Look at the shirt on this person, not in our name. As if anybody's doing anything in his name. The Jews who were murdered on October 7, and the IDF soldiers who have died in combat since October 7 died Kiddush Hashem, for the sanctification of God's name, not in this person's name, I can assure you. These as a Jew Jews are the people who never do or say anything on behalf of the Jewish people, who never were, never have been involved in the Jewish community, and who in fact have no Jewish identity. Accept a Jewish identity they suddenly discover or excavate when it seems like a good opportunity to bash the Jewish state, which is something they always do while invoking their legitimacy as a Jew. So their Jewish birth, largely forgotten or even hidden in the past, then becomes the cudgel with which to beat the Jewish people and the Jewish state. This impulse, this alacrity to criticize and damn the state of Israel, is invariably voiced by people who demand special credibility on the basis that they themselves are Jews. This is insidious. These as a Jew Jews seek to curry favor with non-Jews. They protest their own purity. As a Jew, I oppose Israel. As one talented British film director recently proclaimed to the self-satisfied, beautiful set at the Oscars, I refute my Jewishness, whatever that means. One thing it clearly means is, please don't blame him for those bad Israelis and those bad American Zionist Jews. Please don't do that. The as a Jew Jews may buy themselves a moment of quiet, an illusion of peace and acceptance. But if and when the bell does toll, it will toll for them as well, just as it did for Jews who tried to appease Hitler, or Torquemada, or Khmelnytsky. To the haters, a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. Now, of course, many of these as a Jew Jews will not be sticking around long enough to meet this fate, unless, of course, there is ever a return of something like the Nuremberg laws, whose racial purity classifications defined Jews by their blood, no matter how much distance they thought they had put between themselves and the Jewish people. Most of the as a Jew Jews are not raising Jewish children. They will not have Jewish grandchildren. To remain a Jew in the diaspora is to make a conscious effort. A commitment to occasional lox and bagels, or to tossing references to Kun Olam around as a slogan or a mantra while rallying for some non-Jewish cause of the moment will not suffice to sustain Jewish identity across the generations. With no Jewish content, no Jewish learning, no Jewish activities, and nothing but utter disdain for the Jewish state, these as a Jew Jews are leaving our people. And indeed, in most cases, they already have, except for when there's an anti-Israel meetup, which is when they grab their Jewishness as a tool. Jews do not proselytize Judaism. If anything, many in the Galut proselytize an embrace of assimilation. This is nothing new. The Bible tells us that the Hebrews left Egypt kamushim, a word whose meaning is now somewhat obscure, the root hamesh, 5. Kamushim. Many scholars interpret this word to mean armed. Nachon? And that is that the Hebrews left Egypt with weapons. This is a plausible account. Surely the Hebrews would need weapons for the battles that we've just been reading about in the Tanakh, the battles of the Exodus that lay ahead in the desert. But Rashi offers a different interpretation. Rashi suggests that the word kamushim here means to tell us that only 1/5 of our people went forward toward the promised land, that 4/5 of the Hebrews turned back and remained behind in Egypt, lost to our people forever. And Jews have been turning away from their people ever since. We have lost millions to massacres and pogroms and genocides and, of course, the Holocaust. But over the millennia, we have lost even more to assimilation. That process continues, and it accelerates in the diaspora today. So, whether hiding as part of a keep your head down and just muddle through strategy, or hiding by trying to convince the world that you're a good Jew by being an as a Jew, hiding will be what most diaspora Jews do. Now let's move on to look at another of Michael Orin's 3 options, Aliyah. Many of us have family and friends in Israel. Many of us visit them often. We keep the connection strong. Around the same time that my father's father left behind the pogroms and oppression and poverty and misery of Lithuania for the USA, his sister left Lithuania and made her way to Eretz Yisrael. She carried a passport issued by the British Mandate. Do you know how she was identified in that passport? She was identified as a Palestinian. Think about that. Her surviving son and her grandchildren are an important part of my life today and the life of my family. I spent time with them in Israel in January, and I will do so again soon. My own 4 kids, 3 sons and 1 daughter, all now in their 20s, have all visited and worked in Israel. And 2 of my sons have recently done volunteer work there during the war this year to support the country in its time of need. That's my son Jacob, worked in the fields in January. And that's my son Alex in back, worked in the fields in Israel last month. Psalm 137 tells us, Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yamini. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. We pray about Zion and Jerusalem and Israel every time we pray. The as-a Jews, they either don't know this, the simple son from the Passover Seder, or worse, they know it in their kishkis, but they deny it, the wicked son of the Passover Seder. The land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people, and it has belonged to the Jewish people since God promised it to Abraham when God said, Lech lecha, Genesis. The land of Israel beckons all of you. Some of us will live there. Most of us will not. Some who will not will nonetheless see their children or their grandchildren live there. We make no apologies for loving our Jewish homeland and for dreaming of it always. Israel is eternal. Now, we know that most diaspora Jews will not make Aliyah. We know that they will remain in the countries of their dispersion. So that brings us to the third of Michael Orin's 3 options. Stay and fight. For the Jews among you here, this is most of you. Some of us here will make Aliyah. Some of us here may stay and hide, but most of us here will stay and fight. You didn't come here today because you are a person who hides. On the contrary, you made the effort to show up here because you are someone who fights. Maybe when you were a kid, you fought bullies with your fists. Maybe now you fight them with your speech. Maybe you fight with your pen. Maybe you fight with your wallet or your pocketbook. Maybe you fight with your keyboard. Maybe you fight on social media. Maybe you fight through your phone calls. Maybe you fight through your letters or your emails. Maybe you fight through your efforts to organize. Maybe you fight through your meetings with elected officials or others who influence our lives and who shape American policies. But in whatever ways you do it, you fight, or you are willing to fight. You are here because you know that our Jewish identity is worth fighting for. You are here because you know that our Jewish community is worth fighting for. You are here because you know that we Jews have built something in this country that is worth fighting for. You are here because you love the Jewish people. You are here because you love the United States of America. You are here because your grandparents and parents helped build this country. Maybe you are here because your grandparents or your parents immigrated here with a dream that they labored to make a reality with their sweat and with their love, sometimes with their blood. Maybe you are here because, like me, your mother and your father both served proudly and honorably in the United States Armed Forces. And you'll be damned if some right-wing nut or some left-wing nut can tell you that you are not American enough. So what does that mean? What does that mean? It means that you need to get to work, and you need to get others to get to work. The fight is on. Look at all these Jews and non-Jewish friends of Israel who made the effort to go to the National Mall in Washington, D.C. The fight is on. Stand up. Demand accountability from your elected officials. Demand that they support the Jewish state, which suffered the worst pogrom since the Holocaust on October 7th. Make some noise. Be loud and be proud. Demand the respect of the world. To win respect from others, remember, you must first respect yourselves as Jews. Kol Yisrael Arevim ze lezeh. All of Israel is responsible one for the other. Protest, organize, march. Don't leave the anarchist, fanatic, anti-Israel hooligan mob unanswered. Counter-protest. Fight the battle on social media. Get involved in the political party of your choice. Get deeply involved. Become an activist yourself. Lobby. Write letters to the editor. Don't be complacent. Complacency is for the hiders. You are not a hider. Learn some Hebrew. Read some Tanakh. Share your Jewish pride. Teach your children. Teach your grandchildren. Connect with other Jews. Connect with non-Jewish friends of the Jewish people, many of whom are here today. There are many of these non-Jewish friends of the Jewish people. Many of them are much better friends of the Jewish people than the as a Jew Jews. Reach out to these friends. No, not least, stop pitting yourselves against other Jews. To be sure, as I've said, some of these Jews are lost to us. These are the as a Jew Jews. These are the Jews who go around proclaiming they are the anti-Zionist Jews, which, again, if you've ever worshipped or read anything Jewish, you know is an oxymoron. anti-Zionist Jew. It's an oxymoron. Counter their influence, fight their efforts, but don't waste time trying to win them back. They are lost to us, as so many like them over the millennia have been lost to us. Their descendants will have departed from our people. They will drift away. But for those who remain, we must always remember the principle of Ahavat Yisrael, love of all Jews. Stop demanding fealty to whatever political party you happen to call home. Stop dividing us into warring camps of so-called liberals or so-called conservatives. When you were born a Jew, not a Democrat or a Republican. When your parents brought you to your Brit Milah or your Pidyon Habat, it was because you were a Jew, not because you were a Democrat or a Republican. When you stood under the chuppah and you recited those words to your betrothed, it was Kedat Moshe Yisrael, according to the law of Moses and Israel, not the law of the Democrats or the law of the Republicans. And when you die, you will be buried with Kaddish, not with a Democratic oration or a Republican oration. You live as a Jew, you die as a Jew. So you should be active in politics in whatever way seems best for you. And you should keep working for the betterment of this great country that gave our parents and our grandparents the opportunity and the freedom and the liberty that they were denied overseas, and that allows us to thrive here today. But you should not indulge in some demand for loyalty to one political camp or another. Sometimes what is good for one party or the other is not good for the United States of America. Sometimes one party or the other advances ideas we might like, and sometimes ideas that we might oppose. And we can disagree. Indeed, we do disagree. But never forsake the Jewish people, and never sacrifice Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, on the altar of some demand for fidelity to the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or any other party. Get involved in public life and demand respect for the Jewish people. Out of all the time you spend in other activities and causes and interests and pursuits, you can find some time to help your fellow Jews. And fear nothing. Many of you know Rabbi Baruch Chait's song, which is adapted from an epigram by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. He wrote, Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tsar me'od, ve'ha'ikar lo lefached klal. It means, I would sing it, but I have a really bad voice, except in the shower. All the world, he wrote, is like a very narrow bridge. And the main point is not to fear anything. If Israeli women, like Naomi, and Israeli men can risk their lives to fight terrorists, surely we can risk a little of our free time in some meaningful effort to help the Jewish people, to promote Jewish identity, to safeguard Jewish continuity. As I mentioned, I visited Israel in January. I taught law students. I observed trials and visited courts. I visited with Israeli judges and lawyers. I spent time with family and good friends. I prayed at the Kotel in Yerushalayim, enjoyed the Tel Aviv beachfront, even in winter. Above me there, it says, Kulanu Am Echad. We are one people. And those signs are all over Israel. You'll never know it from the media, but there's tremendous unity and support for the defense of the country across all sectors of the population, including among non-Jewish Israelis, of whom there are more than 1 million, Muslims and Christians and others. And of course, I ate a lot of great shawarma and hummus It doesn't taste the same here. You can't find it. But the most meaningful experiences were my visits. I made 2 visits to Otef Aza, the Gaza envelope, which is the reference to the communities around the border with the Gaza Strip. In a field next to Kibbutz Re'im, you can see at my feet there, those are bullet casings, spent bullet cartridges. I stood at the site. This is the site of the Nova Music Festival, where just 3 months before I was standing there, as Sukkot ended and Simchat Torah began, hundreds of our fellow Jews, beautiful young Israeli women and men, were murdered, gang raped, and kidnapped. These bullet casings covered the ground where I stood. I talked with people whose brothers and sisters and other family members had been killed there, and others whose loved ones were still being held in Gaza, it was visible to us just a couple kilometers away, flat land there, and you could just see Gaza from where we were standing, right there. Imagine those people I was talking to that day were looking at Gaza and realizing their loved ones were right there, and yet they could not reach them. Right there and yet unreachable. And as you probably know, many of the hostages, many of the people taken to Gaza were American citizens as well. So here's, for example, one young woman, you see the American flag, and there's still, by the way, there's still American citizens. You don't read about this, you don't hear anybody talking about it, right? Among the hostages in Gaza are American citizens, like you, like me. At Kibbutz Nir Oz, I toured the burned houses of the residents. More than one fourth of the people who lived in Nir Oz were either murdered or kidnapped. More than one fourth. The homes were burned. You could see this is a home that was burned. Because what the terrorists had done is they ripped out the gas lines and they ignited the structures to literally asphyxiate or smoke the Jews out of their mamadim, which is their protected rooms. Burn them out, asphyxiate them, smoke them out. So the terrorists could then kill, rape, and abduct them. You can see above my head there, it's burned to the eaves. The woman who showed me around that day had survived by hiding with her daughter. And fortunately for them, the terrorists didn't spot them. On either side, her neighbors were not so lucky. On one side, the neighbor family had been murdered. On the other side, the neighbor family had been kidnapped. A few doors down was the home of the Bibas family. Some of you have read about the Bibas family. The little one, Kfir, these beautiful redhead kids, the little one, Kfir, he was only around 8 months old on October 7th. He turned 1, if he was alive at that point, in captivity, and now he's a few months beyond that. If, with the help of God, he's still alive. We don't know. The woman who gave me the tour and showed me the Bibas family home a couple doors down from her, she grew up there in Nir Oz. She had dreamed of peace. She had worked for peace. On many occasions, she had volunteered her time and her resources to drive Arabs from Gaza into Israel for medical treatment. There were many Jews in Otef Aza, very progressive Jews indeed. These are peace camp Jews. To bring it to American terms, these are left of center Jews, if I can just be so crass as to say. Their reward for helping the Arabs of Gaza was to be murdered, raped, mutilated, and kidnapped. At that Nova Music Festival, sunrise was coming, And the young people there were about to release colored balloons and colorful kites that would be seen from Gaza as a symbol of peace. Instead, as they looked up, ready to launch these peace balloons, they saw the Arabs coming in on paragliders to terrorize them. Something to think about. I stood at the Erez crossing, where so many Jews, like my Nero's host, had made her humanitarian transportation efforts for Gazan Arabs, and which tens of thousands of Gazan Arabs used to cross every day for work in Israel. Indeed, a few, not all, a few of these Gazan Arab workers had used that privilege to scout out the kibbutzim and moshavim along the border, and that's why the terrorists, when they came in on October 7th, had a clear blueprint of the entire communities that they raided. The intelligence had been obtained. Hamas and its supporters have ensured that Gazan Arabs will not have the benefit of crossing the Erez crossing for work purposes anytime soon. You have seen the apathy of the world. Even worse, you have seen the hatred of so many in the world. You have seen the hatred and the mendacity of the United Nations. You have seen how UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, turned itself into an auxiliary of the Hamas terrorist army. This picture is this is a still from a video many of you have seen. These two terrorists are UNRWA, or they were UNRWA employees. That was them going in and killing and getting Jewish bodies on October 7th. Oh, and you have seen how Me Too applies to all women and to believing all women, except when those women are Jewish women. Rape matters, except when the victims are Jewish women, then it's okay. What happened to the Me Too movement? I haven't seen them rallying in support of Jewish women. Have you? I hope you recognize the truth of Dara Horn's point that the world loves dead Jews. We are approved when we are dead. We are sometimes sympathized when we are weak or dying or ghettoized, but we are disliked or even hated when we are strong, when we defend ourselves, when we assert our sovereignty, our independence, yes, our Jewish power. There is no way around this. There is only a way through it. That is to be ourselves and to stand up for ourselves. I mentioned Zev Jabotinsky a while ago, and in 1911, he wrote this. Listen to what Jabotinsky wrote in 1911, and I quote, "We constantly and very loudly apologize instead of turning our backs to the accusers, as there is nothing to apologize for and nobody to apologize to. We swear again and again that it is not our fault. Isn't it long overdue to respond to all these and all future accusations, reproaches, suspicions, slanders, and denunciations by simply folding our arms and loudly, clearly, coldly, and calmly answering with the only argument that is understandable and accessible to this public, go to hell? Who are we to make excuses to them? Who are they to interrogate us? What is the purpose of this mock trial over the entire people where the sentence is known in advance? Our habit of constantly and zealously answering any rabble has already done us a lot of harm and will do much more. We do not have to apologize for anything. We are a people, as are all other peoples. We do not have to account to anybody. We are not to sit for anybody's examination. And nobody is old enough to call on us to answer. We came before them, and we will leave after them. We are what we are. We are good for ourselves. We will not change, and we do not want to. Now, an earlier author than Jabotinsky was the author of the Bible. And in Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, King Balak of Moab sends Bilam to curse the Jewish people. Bilam looks out at our camp, and he notes that we are Am Labadad Yishkon, a people that will dwell alone. Bilam is unable to curse us. Instead, he feels the need to praise us. He says, Matovu Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkanatecha Yisrael. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. We are not weakened by our separate identity, by our particularity. That identity is why we are still here 4,000 years later. Strength and resolve and being true to ourselves, that is the way. If we want peace, we must be strong. Every Shabbat, we recite the words of the 29th Psalm. Adonai oz le'amo yiten, Adonai yivarech et amo b'shalom. God will give strength to his people. God will bless his people with peace. Pay attention. God will give strength to his people. God will bless his people with peace. Note the order. That means strength comes first. It is a prerequisite. And then, and only then, will God bless his people with peace. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek, be strong, and may we be strengthened. Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live. Thank you.
Here's time for questions. If anybody has, we've got about 10 to 15 minutes before the next class comes in. So if anyone has questions, feel free.
It's a law school, so I expect some questions, comments. Yes.
Do you have any advice for people who typically are peers that agree with us on a lot of social issues? They're anti-Zionist, and I want to tell them how harmful that is, but it's got me into some trouble. So, good trouble, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, like I said, there's no way around it. That only gets you off track. There's only a way through it, and that's by being respectful but direct. I mean, Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. It's as simple as that. Our people was born there long before Christianity, Islam. That's where we come from. Where does the word Jew come from? It comes from Yehuda, Judah, Judea. That's where we come from. Telling people about the facts is very, very, very important. And I think the Jewish people are entitled to their own little piece of territory smaller than the state of New Jersey. And another thing to tell your fellow Americans when they're doubting is just to ask them, what would we do if terrorists attacked from Mexico or Canada and continued lobbing missiles, murdering over 50,000 Americans? You have to scale it up, right, for population difference, right? It's 50 to 70,000 Americans murdered, and then thousands and thousands of Americans taken hostage, raped, mutilated, kidnapped. Does anybody have any questions what the United States would do and what the people of the United States would rightfully insist their government did? So again, anybody who would doubt that doesn't think the Jews should defend themselves, is happy with Jews dying, just not very happy with Jews who like to live. Yes.
Your point is a good one about how this is something that's unfortunately nothing new and has been happening since as far back as the reform we just celebrated. Do you see anything different this time versus what you've seen maybe even just pre-Holocaust?
Well, different this time is that it's much worse now because now you have lots and lots of jihadists in the United States and in Western European capitals who are supported by a lot of fellow travelers. And most of the fellow travelers have really no clue about the facts, but find the path of least resistance to follow the intimidating jihadi mobs. And it's important to fight back against that because, you know, political leaders, they look out and they see who are the mobs in the streets, what are they demanding? I need to be responsive to them, right? So it's part of my message is to stand up and fight. Yes.
I think in the beginning you mentioned, how interesting it is that some of these Christian and Catholic schools have been a lot more supportive than non-religious schools. And I don't know if I'm really interested in your thoughts about like the way that institutions have been perpetuated. Like for me as a law student. Yeah.
A lot of the, a lot of the students who were captured by some of these extremist ideologies were activist students in the 60s and 70s, and now they are senior professors indoctrinating the young people. I mean, Jew hatred is a virus. It's dormant in human beings like other viruses, like herpes virus. It never goes away. It's just living there, right? And so something can awaken and get this virus amped up. Christianity had the Reformation, but even after the Reformation, the Holocaust happened in the heart of Christian Europe, right? And it wasn't until Pope John's Nostra Aetate, second, Vatican II, Pope John of blessed memory, helped to turn the tide. When my dad grew up down the street here, he's born in 31, on Easter Sunday, the Jewish kids had to either run or fight. And you know the kind of person my dad is, so you know what he did. But, because the priest would preach Jew hatred and the perfidious Jews on Easter Sunday, right? Pope John did a lot to change that. But, Islam has not had a reformation. There have been attempts since 9/11. The Saudi curriculum has gotten better each year. There's studies done. So, progress is being made. And before October 7, as you know, the Abraham Accords countries were progressing. A shul was built in the Emirates, so things can change, but it takes a lot of time. And my position is that Jewish people have to remain strong and persistent, and not weaken. Yes.
What are your, this happened recently, but the young people who were invited to the dean of Berkeley Law School's home and then decided to stage a disruptive event there, and then certain left-wing activist groups, namely the National Lawyers Guild people, legitimately argued there was a limited purpose public forum to disrupt someone's house inside the house.
Absolutely disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. I'm sorry?
I said, where do you think this whole, these other organizations come from when they make this really strange legal argument that doesn't seem to hold up at all?
Well, of course it doesn't. Ironically, Erwin Chemerinsky, who I know and who I visited with in October, actually, shortly after the October 7 attacks, I spoke at Berkeley Law School. I spoke to a couple classes. I did an hour-long talk with Dean Chemerinsky in a room like this at Berkeley. I met with Jewish students and non-Jewish students. Had a wonderful visit. Ironically, Erwin Chemerinsky is not only one of the nation's leading scholars on the First Amendment, if not the leading scholar on the First Amendment, and one of the nation's leading constitutional law scholars. He is also a lover of peace and what would generally be called a man of the left, for lack of a better term. He is a champion of robust speech rights and a gentle soul. Many people, if somebody appropriated their own home and garden as their forum, as that woman did in that video, might not have reacted as peacefully as Orin did. That's his home is his castle, and she had no right to do what she did. There's an example of a jihadist. That woman's a jihadist who had recently been responsible, along with her fellow Palestinian students group, whatever they call it, in circulating all over the bulletin boards at Berkeley Law School where I visited. Classically anti-Semitic blood libel posters of Erwin Chemerinsky like dripping blood. It's just shameful and outrageous. So it needs to be combated in every way possible. And as far as the aspect of your question about the First Amendment legitimacy of that, it's absurd. That's his home. And as Chemerinsky himself said, the First Amendment doesn't apply in his home. Those people were invited, and to his credit, he's continuing to invite students to his home. I wouldn't do that if I were him. But he did say security would be present, which is a very wise move. Yes, ma'am.
That woman on Dean Chemerinsky's picnic table, those people in the photo with the Cornell professor, are the next generation of elites. Those are our future political leadership. So 2 out of 3 branches, at least, are already struggling with this now. What happens in 20 years?
Yeah, I think it's very troubling, and that's why when I'm invited to speak at university, I accept, because I want to speak to the young people. Like people like me, we're like going to be over the hill soon if we're not already. And as you point out, the people in universities now, they're the leaders of tomorrow, and it's very important, I believe, not to allow a minority of vocal Jew haters to take over the public square. I mean, they have First Amendment rights, but not in Dean Chemerinsky's house, right? But in the public square, and I will defend their rights. But by golly, where are the people speaking against it? You can't leave a vacuum. I don't mean you. We can't leave a vacuum where only the Jew haters are heard. That's the path to perdition. Yes, Julie.
So what we see with many of these anti-Israel activists, whether they're avid Jews or coming from the far left or coming from the Islamist sector, is also a virulent hatred for America. So I'm wondering how much you tie into the work that you do and talking to your colleagues about the threat that these same individuals pose to America. Israel and America share the same values. We saw who stepped in with the Iran missiles over the weekend. That many countries recognize the threat of extremism from more than we see it. But I just want to get your perspective on sort of this tie-in between anti-Israel hatred and also hatred for America, and what that means for both of our futures.
Yeah, absolutely. That's true. As we all know, Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East. It's the only one where a gay couple could walk down the street holding hands together and not be attacked. It's the only country that allows minority religions to thrive and prosper. As you probably know, there are Muslim and Christian Arabs in all walks of Israeli life, including on the Supreme Court, in command positions in the army, on faculty of universities, et cetera, et cetera. These values that we cherish here in our country are values that are cherished in Israel and nowhere else in Israel's region. But a lot of people are weak and cowardly. Again, it's just an easier path to just sort of put your head down and ignore it. But again, for whom doth the bell toll, the bell also will toll for us when the time comes, because it's just avoiding reality to think. And here's what I say to people, and I should have said it in response to your earlier question. Even if anybody Not only Jews, but non-Jews think, you know what, this storm will pass. These lunatics in the streets, these people, behaving abominably, it'll pass. Well, you know what? I would just say to people who say that, think of your children and your grandchildren. What kind of America do you want them to live in? And this is a fight worth having.